Labor has only been in power for the last 6 years. This is what's happened during that time.
Their policy has just been failing. They're trying to rebrand this as being smart on crime. Let's do the same thing, but call it something different. If you can't beat them, you join them.
So you have stopped crime, got the money from those proceeds that they were trying to keep for themselves, and then you've gone and given it back to the criminals.
It's create the problem and then fund them to fix the problem. It's almost like a money laundering scheme.
We have all seen that crime is getting worse. The ram raids, the terrified shop owners, the traumatised innocent bystanders. It's not getting any better. Yet everybody has different opinions on what will help it. Some say soft on crime, some say hard on crime, but it seems like the media keeps pushing the narrative of the less we do, the better things will be. And that just doesn't seem to ring true. This week, one of New Zealand's most prominent gang members, Harry Tam, was on Facebook advocating for specifically gang members to vote for Labor. Labor has only been in power for the last 6 years. This is what's happened during that time. 500% increase in ram raids. A police report based on a sample of the ram raids showed that only 37% of them resulted in enforcement action. Violent crime has increased by 21%. That includes murder, manslaughter, robbery, assault, sexual assault, and domestic violence. The violent gang members on home detention has tripled. There are now 8,875 gang members in New Zealand, which is an over 50% increase since Labor was voted in. And the new members aged 18 to 25 has increased by 75%. Phil, you've been looking into this with me. Where have we gone wrong here in New Zealand? What's causing all these problems?
Well, we've just seen that report come out titled Toward an Understanding of Aotearoa New Zealand's Adult Gang Environment. And this was the report put together by the Chief Science Advisor. And I think what we're seeing with this is a desperate attempt by the government to distance themselves from that soft on crime approach, which is obviously failing. National is typically seen as being hard on crime with the likes of Crusher Collins in Christchurch, and Labor is typically seen as that soft on crime. And I think what we're seeing here with this report is they're trying to rebrand this as being smart on crime, as their policy has just been failing. We've seen with those statistics, expansion of the gangs, these ram raids, which have been a more recent development in crime in New Zealand, and even they have sort of evolved now to where the crime is so blatant that they're going into some of these jewellery stores and things like that in the middle of the day. Once the bollards have been put up, they just walk through the front doors, smash it up, and take what they want. So I think what we're seeing, especially with this report, is a shift in the narrative because they've had such a bad policy failure.
So it's kind of Orwellian doublespeak. It's how can we manipulate and kind of masquerade what we're actually doing?
Yeah, I think it's definitely Orwellian doublespeak. It's let's do the same thing but call it something different and hope people won't notice. Because they really need to shift the talking point on crime because it's gone crazy.
It's getting scarier. And you look on any like Facebook community pages, you see people are constantly being broken into, and it's the same thing all the time. The police don't do anything. The police aren't really worried. The police can't really stop it. And they can't when it's gone to a point where it's out of control. And then if the people are caught, it seems that the police are under-equipped to be able to actually prosecute them properly. But what are some of the solutions that Labor has tried that are just not working?
Yeah, well, we've seen, the money given to gangs. Now, that's been given out of the crime proceeds fund. And
Sorry, I mean, that's ironic in itself. So you have stopped crime, got the money from those proceeds that they were trying to keep for themselves, and then you've gone and given it back to the criminals.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cycle there, isn't it?
Wow.
It's create the problem and then fund them to fix the problem. It's almost like a money laundering scheme. And And I mean, the money in that fund is huge. In total, over the last 4 years over the 4 years between 2019 to sort of 2022, they dished out or awarded about $140 million from that fund. That's
Wow.
massive.
Back to gangs specifically.
Not to gangs, but to just various projects.
One of those programs really interested me when I looked into it, which was the meth rehabilitation program, because the participants in it could self-identify as being off meth. So you would have no idea if that program worked or not, because they would just ring up and say, oh yeah, I'm off meth now, or I haven't done it for X amount of time, and there's no accountability. So essentially the gangs are being blanket written a big check, I think it was $3 million, and they could just go and use it how they wanted on this program, but there was no accountability on the actual participants in the program. And that really did shock me, because they only take in a small amount of people. So if there's zero accountability, how can we ever show that programs are beneficial or not?
It seems like a bit of a conflict of interest as well to be giving them that money. And so I would have thought that it would have been far wiser to have other institutions come along and work alongside them and run those programs and things, working alongside the gangs to get people off meth, because that is a good thing for society, to get people off meth. But I think the stretch is when you're actually giving that money to the organisation that's created the problem in the first place to run and manage that. Is that wise? Maybe not.
I mean, another one was the cultural reports that they were paying for. So different organisations can charge different amounts for cultural reports, and essentially they're a report where they can go and a gang member can ask for a cultural report to be done on their background. A third-party institution can come along, create that report, and it can say things like they've come from a tough life, they've got these kind of family issues at home. Now, gang members are being paid to create these cultural reports on behalf of gang members. I mean, and they're getting paid government money to then produce a report that lowers the sentencing of the gang member. So it just seems like this crazy cycle where I could completely understand if it's independent social workers that are getting funded that money. Absolutely no problem with cultural reports. I think that understanding someone's background, especially a history of long-term abuse, is actually important. I don't have any problem with those kind of social initiatives.
You know, a lot of these initiatives seem misguided, and it seems like they haven't considered the unintended consequences, which is, you know, often when you rush these types of projects and you're just trying to do what looks good without thinking through the implications of the policies, you have what you call unintended consequences. One of the things we see this government doing as well is they seem to be concerned about equity. Now, equity is what you call equality of outcome. So you're looking for a outcome result. Now, how that differs from equality is, in equality, you're looking for equality of opportunity. So you're giving people the opportunity and you're putting the responsibility on them to choose the path. With equity, it's all about quota-based outcomes. And so it gets really dangerous, because you're actually having to reclassify things and sort of fudge the numbers to get the outcomes you need. And we can see that happening with crime and things as well. They say, we want to lower the certain demographics in the prison population. Well, that's an outcome-based quota. And so what do you have to do that? Well, then you have to do things like not send them to jail in the first place, because people are going to commit crimes. You can't stop them from committing crimes, because you can only catch them once they have. And so to stop them going to jail, to go into prison, what you have to do then is you have to adjust the pathway and just not send them to jail. And that's how you get your quota. And that's what we see as well. We see a lot more people doing home detention. And I guess the difficulty is that really rehabilitating them, or is that just a holiday at home?
Another interesting thing that happened this week was when the Labour MP Ingrid Leary found herself accidentally at a mob meeting thinking it was an Electoral Commission hooey. and a talk about enrolment. What do you think about that? Is this something that's completely accidental? I mean, it came out that there were Electoral Commission members at the Mungalbon meeting. So what is going on there? Are they just trying to reach a segment of the society that isn't reached? Is there something more there? Do you find it an odd thing or an acceptable thing?
If they're members of of society, then they have the right to vote, right? And we can't deny gang members the right to vote.
How do you feel about the prisoners that are in prison that are now allowed to vote? That the Electoral Commission campaigned to be able to vote?
To me, that's a red flag, right? Because why is it that they are wanting the criminals to vote? Is it increasing their vote? It must be, right? Otherwise, you would let that slide and perhaps let the other opposition, when they get elected, you'd let them do that if it's going to benefit them.
Labor has just come out saying that as of April the 1st this year, they're going to increase social welfare benefits. And there was a report a few years ago saying that 9 out of every 10 gang members was on a main social benefit. Do you think that there could be abuse of the system happening within there?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess to reinforce that point, I was just reading a report published by the police on methamphetamine, and that confirmed the same thing. Also, there's another Official Information Act response that we found, and that was showing you what the relationship between the gangs and police were like during COVID. The government officials, the police, were bending over backwards to cater to the sort of gang community, to provide them with food, with resources, with housing. And it's a list of meeting minutes does show that there was a lot of collaboration or a coalition being formed between the police and gangs. I think that word was even used in the report. And the police were seeing COVID as a chance to reset the police-gang relationship. And so that's probably... Is that a directive from this government that that's how they want the police to be policing? And maybe that's what they're considering to be smart on crime. If you can't beat them, you join them. So perhaps that's where we're heading.
But it does feel like that, doesn't it? And I think if we turn to some of the solutions that might be more practical, I mean, you have extreme countries where there are really drastic consequences for crime, such as theft, and like people can have hands cut off, and the consequences are really severe. But then we have the problem where it seems like there are no consequences for crime. You get very short terms for very violent, horrible crime. And now a lot of people, it seems, are being let off crime that they shouldn't be because we're worried about the cost of financially supporting a prison. You don't need these kind of amenities that you're putting in these prisons. Why don't we just make a bare bones prison, go back to basic, and we easily could afford that. And then if we look at the social programs, I think social programs to help rehabilitate people are wonderful. And looking at the historic problems people are facing, looking at the familial problems that people are facing, we should invest in those. But it's how are we investing in them and where are those funds being used? Are we looking at more social workers that go into these areas? Are we actually looking at proper community-based initiatives? Or are we just throwing money in ridiculous areas that are going straight back into the hands of the people that are largely causing the problem?
Laws are only as good as the enforcement mechanism that you have to enforce that law. So if you don't have a way of saying, hey, you must follow this law, if you've got no consequence for following that law, then what's the point in having the law? Because people are just going to be like, it doesn't deter me from breaking this law. Now, if you're in Qatar and you're going to steal something, you think twice about stealing because, hey, you could lose a hand and that's handy to have, right?
I mean, yeah, it's a pretty drastic consequence.
It's a drastic consequence. Now, some people would say that that's backwards, and the danger of that kind of system with such a harsh consequence is that, well, hey, if you didn't actually commit that crime, well, you can't get that hand back. And so maybe, that is taking things too far, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But you still want a decent deterrent to get your population to maintain that law. Now, that law is generally there to protect other members of society anyway. That's what laws are supposed to do. They're supposed to protect people and their property. And, I mean, we're not seeing that happen in New Zealand.
It's a pretty scary future, really. If you think that all that advocating for at the moment, none of it seems like it's actually heading in a direction which is going to solve any of the problems that we're facing. It might escalate them, or it might just have them sitting at neutral, but none of it seems to be actually declining prison numbers, declining crime numbers. No one's feeling safer. It's not helping the police. So how can we keep endorsing the current situation?
Well, the interesting thing is as well, like, what if we just don't forget about what has happened in the past? I mean, if we look at the approaches to crime, over the last several years with this government and with Labour in, we've had a soft on crime approach. And what's happened? We have this massive ballooning problem with increases in gang numbers, ram raids are going rampant, and that's young people doing those ram raids in a lot of cases. If we look back to, say, Crusher Collins, what happened to the Christchurch boy racer scene? I mean, that used to be huge. If you look at things like that, I think a tougher consequence for a crime does work, because people go, they get fed up with losing their car. They spent all that time and effort on that car. The thing gets crushed in seconds. That is demoralizing to the criminal. That's a good deterrent. And maybe we need to look at some different options to some of these other problems, organised crime, drugs in New Zealand. Maybe we need to look at some of these other politicians that haven't been in these mainstream parties. They haven't been in politics all their life, and they're not trying to just play the game so that they'll get the votes.
I'm looking forward to the election and just seeing what's going to happen. The Labour coalition has been in power now for 6 years. They've been soft on crime and big on funding. The data is not good. Either they need to change track or they need to be out. That is, of course, if you want less crime.